Interesting. What do you do if you don't mind me asking?
I'm one of the 3D artists at Snapchat, or
Oh,
Snap
very cool.
Inc. Formally speaking.
Nice. How did you decide to kind of work for Snapchat? Were there other people that you were looking to work for?
There was, I mean, the exact moment that I decided to join Snapchat was they posted up about a 3D artist position on their website. I actually interviewed with them back in 2018 already.
Wow.
So it was an email to their team manager, who I originally tangentially worked with at the third floor back in 2015, with a question of, so I know I went on site for this interview already, and you guys need to like me, and I've applied for this before in the meantime, but what exactly would you guys need from me that changed from the last interview till now? And then my team manager essentially said, well, we're not entirely super sure if you can do the hairstyle that we need you to do, and which confused me because in my own estimation, I've done that before already. But I took it upon myself to do a quote unquote proxy art test, took a existing Bitmoji hairstyle in 2D and then did my 3D pass on it, and that's what convinced them to bring me on. The more interesting situation was the series of 5 interviews back to back I had with various studios, game studios or otherwise, come mid-October to late December 2020. And then Snapchat was also part of that, just because they were, my lead specifically told me, hey, I'd like to bring you on full time instead of contract. So
Wow.
that was a interesting, I say stressful, but like very touch and go, and a remarkable amount of good work turned out for me, in my personal opinion. But that's kind of a project analysis.
I see it. And I know you're mentioning about you were contracted. I mean, was that adding the stress, or what was creating the stress that you felt?
The stress at the time was just having to manage like different interviews, because most of them were asking for some sort of test to be completed. So one week I'd be working on one test, and then the next week right then after I'd be working on another test. And each test presented its own challenges. I know one of them was essentially asking me to do a 3D environment diorama, and I wanted to do it so well past the minimum requirements. So that was me having to reflex strengths that I hadn't practiced since quarantine started, at least with my last studio, and cobbling together a lot of disparate pieces of information and blocks of scripts together in Unreal Engine to essentially create what I'm really proud of, which is an animated diorama to answer for the art test they were looking for. And this was for that game company.
That's dope. You know, what's interesting too, I noticed that you also do stand-up comedy. What kind of made you go in that direction?
That was I mean, in terms of people being funny, I mean, that's generally kind of a natural occurrence, right? When people are young, in the same way kids draw.
Right.
I think for me, I didn't try starting to do it formally until 2018, when, like, after a year or two of listening to What the Fuck with Mark Maron, he at some point remarks at the beginning of the show, because he has like a kind of solo monologue he does, where he says, if you just wanted to start to try it, it's all you gotta do is have 3 minutes of jokes, 5 minutes of jokes, and then open mics are free. You just go to a local nearby one and give it a go. For me personally, I'm not a victim to stage fright all that often. I've done on stage performance stuff in high school already, so all of that kind of anxiety is already out of my system from one reason or another. So I did the open mic, and people laughed, which is great. And there was like the two jokes were a explanation as to why Asians are bad drivers, because we see everything in widescreen, and then the other one was why the Alamo caused me short-term memory loss as a child, which I give credit to my buddy Nathan for helping me develop those jokes. And that was very much like, oh, this is a full set, I can totally do this. I would have remarked that I didn't get more serious until middle of 2020, when I started to pick up on the fact that people in LA were doing outdoor open mics. And especially it's really picked up since then, since I moved to LA formally back in July of 2021.
Oh, wow. Very dope. You know, it's from you kind of being like a character designer even for games, right? And then even just doing stand-up comedy. I know we kind of connected because you're interested on the topic about like Christian dating. I wanted to get your thoughts on just Christian dating in general. What do you think about the current environment for it, and what's your I guess your opinion on it so far? Because it is interesting. I'm sure there's different types of Christian churches out there. People have their different rules on dating, and I just wanted to get your take on it.
I'll try to start from like a larger picture in from my position specifically. I recognize, having grown up in Southern California, we're removed from a lot of big cultural movements that will come to California at some point, from the outside in. Maybe growing up doing church here, understanding American Christendom from this place, unintentionally insulated me from things I'm learning, hearing about now, essentially, whether it's how conservative churches can be, or how like the sexual assault cases or harassment cases that have erupted in various other churches around the country. And it's not just simply West Coast churches. I mean, I think about Mars Hill, for example, that had issues. But what it has felt like for me growing up here is that, now, especially now as an adult and going to what is essentially a wider church, because I grew up in a Korean American church, especially, that also helped to insulate me, is that I'm like, oh shit, you're like carrying baggage from your Southern Baptist roots, or oh, there's a reason why Footloose is not just about a town saying they don't like dancing. That's coming from a tradition of like a Christian denomination tradition of emphasizing sobriety and not drinking and stuff like that. Whereas for me, I had a combination of Koreans are really good at drinking if they're not good at holding it. And number two is that, you can drink, just don't be an idiot about it. Don't be drunk. And so it's the same thing, the same kind of retroactive perception and observations happening for me personally, that I'm seeing a lot of baggage coming from different parts of the country, different just demographics, essentially, whether it's racial, whether it's denominational, whether that's regional. And so I'm recognizing issues that I'm not familiar with, whether like a lot of people are. I mean, we connected presumably via Heart of Dating originally, right? Right. Just to verify that. Like a lot of those posts I'm noticing now, just a week and a half in, it's a lot of discussions of, I don't know how to flirt with people, I don't know how to express interest, or I don't know how to end this relationship in a reasonably quick way. A lot of stuff that, I mean, we'd have to get into my own history, like that I feel are fairly inimical or tiny issues relative to the bigger scope of what relationships could be. And I'm thinking back to like one of my best friends who I didn't realize was an abusive relationship until he broke up with his girlfriend like 2 years later. And every time I saw them, they were completely fine. But as he describes, like, oh yeah, she's a demon. Okay, I am so sorry that I did not, frankly, investigate further with you and spend more time with you to realize that this was not healthy. And I love this guy to death, but he's essentially much more passive and very much a people pleaser, which I'm usually not. So it's been confusing in the sense of both me having to reckon with, oh, this is a lot of baggage people are carrying that I'm not carrying personally. And there's other stuff. But on the flip side, it's also me having like practice empathy in all the situations I end up doing. Like, I mean, I remember a date I had, which went on for 3 hours. It was like a really long early dinner, and I thought it went well. I just didn't realize, apparently, me drinking 2 cocktails over the course of a very long dinner was going to trigger this lady's relationship with memories about her last ex's relationship with alcohol, and she called him an alcoholic. I don't know if that's for sure certain. People have problems with alcohol, but alcoholics that's a different label entirely. But to me, I mean, she's working with a different definition of red flags and concern, whereas I at the time was like, this is me, 2 drinks over a very long dinner means I'm having a very good time. I feel confident and I feel secure in the fact that I'm assuming you're not going to freak out about this, and I am surely not going to do anything crazy, because this is fairly standard for me if I'm having like a good, reasonable time, a long dinner, especially with all the food we're eating. And that was very much a long discussion. Credit to her about her explaining where she was coming from and why that made her uncomfortable, so on and so forth. And she's coming from a place, she came from Washington State, different context, so on and so forth. And I mean, this is a joke, but it's true. Like, my default normal to me is Los Angeles crazy. I mean, you live here, like driving here, like we are okay with it presumably, but to everybody else that comes in from like Washington, Texas, Ohio, the memes exist for a reason. But I'm here thinking, this is fun. I like the fact that I have to practice jackknifing into lanes to be, courteous to other drivers around me, or, that parking is an effort. But I mean, I practice enough and I have my strategies up to this point, but I'm saying that at a local. It's been challenging for me overall, encountering the Christian dating as a culture, mostly from the outside in, frankly. And I mean, there was a challenge to me once again, because I went to HOD meetup for Los Angeles last week, and the lady who was hosting it, who's a dating coach essentially,
Yeah.
pointedly asked me, "What are you looking for?" And the response was, "Well, I have a lot of no's. That's obvious to me. There's not the same volume of yeses, but I'm saying that as someone who has consistently haven't had long relationships, but those relationships ended not because of me, it's because the other party ended them at the time that they did, whether it was because they moved out of state for grad school or they just frankly realized that they personally did not have enough time for me,
Mm.
even though but that's so situation dependent on each
Yeah.
relationship and whatnot. So to sum it up all up, it's a curious kind of, for what it feels like is I have to be in a position of empathy and practicing that kind of
Mm.
proactive understanding of where people are coming from, because I'm still waiting for someone to either A, really push my buttons, and
Mm.
then, or B, surprise me at this point.
Mm.
I think at a macro level, like purity culture, I did not like our church did that, but at most it was a purity ring, and I believe a reasonable discussion about like this is why we're arguing that sex before marriage is not a biblically sound, or sex before marriage is a biblically sound doctrine, and why as a Christian you should do your best to abstain from sex before marriage. But it was never to the point that I remember where it's like there was Bible thumping it over our heads. But the conversations here about, oh, there was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and millions of people read it, and there were Bible studies surrounding it, and you guys nuked your relationships because of that book, and now the guy who wrote that book is now not a Christian anymore, and he's fucked himself over because he didn't have a healthier approach to the LGBT community, among other things. And I'm learning about all that shit right now retroactively.
Mm.
And I'm almost assuming, like, if I meet a white Christian in LA, I'm like, how did the middle of America fuck you over? Or how did, like, your original church context fuck you over? And they've been fascinating conversations. And my heart breaks for friends of mine who are dealing with this in various ways. And I have to adapt to that because I would have thought X thing was reasonable, but apparently Y thing is the thing that's creating problems that I would not have anticipated unless I was culturally aware of what was going on.
You know what's interesting? I actually come from previously came from a church where it sounds like the people you've encountered, they're okay with dating outside their church. I've noticed some churches they only do in-house dating, and it's good to hear. Yeah, crazy, right? And that's
It's
cultish.
like a company feature or something, or product feature. Jesus.
Yeah, it's a trip because I'm like, you know what? That's kind of weird that it's keeping it that way, and it's sad because I know folks in there that are good-hearted, but they're
Right.
limiting themselves in just that specific church, and they're in their 30s or 40s, and it's very unfortunate to see people stuck in that when they could explore more options or at least see other people that are of the same faith. But they're just trapping themselves, and at least I'm bringing it up is because at least it's cool to hear that you're actually meeting people from different spots, and yeah, they have their own, like you said, backgrounds and some things that are just kind of flaggish, or maybe
Right.
it's just not the right timing, for whatever reason they didn't share with you, like, you know what, I'm too busy. I don't know why. Like, to me too, is like you got to be an adult and like know like the commitment you're gonna make or try to meet someone. You got to make some time for them if you're gonna share this life. But I'm sure
Right.
you're aware of that. What do you feel
I mean,
like?
to a certain degree.
Yeah, right.
For me, like, I'll use the previous example, like a relationship that I was really excited about, frankly, ended last week because I finally got her to, I think, admit to herself implicitly that she just did not have time right now to invest in a romantic relationship. And it bummed me. I don't know about breaking my heart because it was only 3 dates in, but
Yeah.
like it bummed me out. Like, man, like I'll put it this way. The biggest thing that I felt like was the wall was that she left her phone on airplane mode most of the time.
Okay.
And she was a lady who works for a VC firm, babysitting companies in Asia somewhere.
Mm.
And I, just coming from where I am right now, a tech company, having worked adjacently in video games development, like I kind of implicitly know the jokes, the cynicism, the vibe of life that involves with that.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley is a great TV show to explain that too, as a documentary.
Mm.
So I would have thought that, hey, this is going to be an easy adapt. Like, I don't, mechanically speaking, this should be fairly adult conversations about meeting each other. And the first 3 dates were fantastic. Like, I remember the last day being like a 6-hour tour through Boyle Heights. Not that I was doing the tour, but like we were going through the tour company. But so I didn't realize that she basically took a after work class that she says took 6 to 12 hours almost every night. That now after like 3 weeks of silence, she's like, oh, like, hey, I got to call it in. And like, oh shit, okay. And like that bums me out. Even though I told like, hey, I'm fine with adapt. Like I'm the one with more free time here. Like, so I'm fine with adapting and meeting where you're at. But I mean, I don't know what's going on in her head specifically necessarily, if it's about wrong timing or not right now. I mean, the last feedback I got was, and my final response was like, understood. I hopefully we'll see each other again in the future. I got like a heart emoji on my iPhone message. So that's better than silence, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's only to emphasize, like, to a certain degree, I'm aware, but like I'm still working with the black box.
Hmm. And then I kind of was thinking is I wonder if there's much of a difference between Christian dating and then the secular dating, right? Or just people just meeting up like regularly, not having to be tied to a faith or something like that. Do you feel like there's much of
Mhm.
a difference? It's almost the same thing.
I mean, secular dating encompasses so many different possible types of relationships, whether it's situationships, friends with benefits, swingers, polygamy, polyamory, ethical non-monogamy. Um, I'm sure there's elements that are shared, of course. It just depends on which type of secular dating we're talking about. I mean,
Mm,
I'd
mm,
remark for myself that it's been very rare to bring up theological, spiritual topics
mm,
within the first couple of dates. Like I almost have this assumption with my naivete that like it's going to come up during either an argument or political discussion or directly talking about church context or church related things,
mm.
like, oh, I don't like that pastor, and like, why don't you like that pastor? And then going into like how does she define
Yeah.
that? How do I define that? Conversations I've had with male friends of mine that I'm not trying to fuck, but very different when you're trying to like actively be on the better side of the other person in terms of dating, right?
Mm,
So I'm sure that's the modifier, right? Relative to what Christian dating can involve versus what secular dating involves. But I mean, there's still shared elements, right? Like, what are your plans for the future? Are you the kind of person who's, proactive at the beginning and then like gets comfortable? Like, what's your attachment style? Love
mm.
languages are obviously pretty shared between various groups because there's a practical use to it. Enneagrams and other personality assessment tests to ascertain and figure out who the other person is in general. Hopefully, not to specifically mind read them. Uh, and right now, I just frankly don't have enough context to remark on what the differences could be, just because I've most of the time filter that out ahead of time, because most of like all my relationships in the past have gone through uh, from online dating specifically, whether it's apps or through something else. All the in-person attempts I've had, the organic ones that some people call like the organic meet cutes, have,
Yeah.
in my estimation, just failed.
Mm. And why do you think that's the case?
I mean, on my end, it's my lack of emotional intelligence as a person, which probably also helps influence why I do stand up so easily. It
Oh,
also applies to my assessment of the women that I think I like. I mean,
yeah.
I can assess what's pretty. They're paying me to paint pretty pictures at work. That's clearly the case. It's more like really extrapolating and future casting this person's like very reserved but like stoic in
Mm,
this context. I wonder what that could possibly mean. Or, this person's very creative. Like she's a writer, and
yeah.
she has a very very specific bohemian style about her. Right? Like most of the time, I stop myself where I don't even consider extrapolating from that. So it's hard, I can't even within even like a margin of error predict what things can mean behind what I'm seeing. I know other people do those calculations, right? Both for me, about me, and on behalf of other people. But I'm usually the kind of person who I date to figure those things out. Like I get to the coffee to figure those things. Like I know you're attractive to me and you're attractive, but like let's get to the nuts and bolts of like who are you as a person in between me and you,
Mm,
uh, so on and so forth. So I think that's probably why that's a contributing reason why the organic meet cutes don't work out. And number two, most of the times those happen, they're usually finding me in situations where I am like at 110% gregariousness or in a very like atypical context to what I am from the day to day. Like I can party hard. I am like I'm a performer. Like I will be slamming jokes left and right and trying to roast people rather somewhat successfully in like social contexts.
Right.
That's not necessarily going to happen when I'm at work or when I'm what kind of does in the same volume at work or in the same volume at home. Like when you see me at home, I'm usually like very chill, very quiet. I'm usually working on something too. And that's a very, I don't even call it introverted time, but it's very focused, not like I'm reaching out constantly blasting music everywhere kind of activity. So there people aren't definitely getting a certain side of me that's not a complete picture. And that particular side is like when I'm usually, was it on point in terms of being sociable, extroverted, performative, so on and so forth.
And I know that we connected as well through the Facebook group. What do you feel
Right.
is something that people can do in that group to kind of improve the Christian dating experience, or even try to make it easier for one another to just connect instead of making it a little complex?
I would want to believe that just asking someone out to coffee shouldn't be that big of a deal, but I don't want to not consider the fact that that's a very large pressure anxiety for people. For me, I say that to someone. For me, it's like I just had 2 coffees within the last week and a half during the weekday, during lunch, near work. Like that's easy for me in my head in terms of me making that decision. But I recognize for other people, wherever they happen to be, yeah, that's a big issue. But that's the first thing that comes to mind is that there should be a lot less pressure, both in regards to how closely we hold rejection for ourselves, as much as it hurts, and number 2, that like, but there's the work, like like the work of relationships should not be that heavy at the front end. I'm thinking about people who think dating apps, they exhaust themselves from dating apps. I'm like, how much effort are you putting into it? Or how fast are you getting to it, like actually meeting in person? Because it cannot be this. I'll put it like the way I use dating apps is very much just shotgunning as many profiles as I can that I find remotely attractive. But it's under the auspices of this is not a real relationship. I'm just at face value peacocking myself. And if they like it, then that's great. Well, let's get to the coffee as soon as possible. I mean, that works. That's worked for me on Hinge, on Bumble, Hinge especially, where I mean, bald face, like all I'm doing is essentially copy pasting reliable jokes to very canned prompt responses from other people. So for example, if they make any mention of Jesus vaguely, I will say, hey, here's a joke. I think Jesus Christ is about as white as Taco Bell is authentically Mexican. Now you're smiling, which is great. Most people do. And if they do, my assumption, like to me, there's a lot behind that joke. It's like, hey, you're far more aware of at least Christian history and the realities of what's going on. And American Christianity is not just like this perfect bubble. Like there's other shit going on. And number 2, if you can hang with that sense of humor and you don't think that's like controversial, because some people say like, oh, that's not funny. That's just facts. Like, yeah, it's also that at the same time.
Yeah.
There's other ones where it's like, someone will mention Chick-fil-A, and it's gotten to the point where like my joke for that is now either I think Chick-fil-A is colonizing other people's flavors to season their own chicken, like sriracha, Polynesian sauce. That's hella imperialism, right? Or it's, look, if we're not going to pay them reparations, we might as well give them something they'd like. Chick-fil-A should be open on Sundays for just Black people. And then those are spicier takes, but if they like it,
yeah,
that makes me happy, because it's like, okay, like this is medium level to how bad it's going to get. And this is very descriptive of my personality of wanting to challenge things consistently, especially with, like, at least with some of my material, like my understanding of my relationship with what racism is, and between how my relationships, Asians' relationships with the rest of other ethnicities. But that's not work for me. Once again, those are constant copy paste responses to a lot of consistent prompts, because apparently it's very unique. A lot of people like people with a sense of humor. A lot of people like people who are ambitious, who are what else that are adventurous, right? I feel like we could start fifth wave feminism. We can get all the women to agree that sarcasm is their second language, that they love adventure, and I think it's espresso martinis right now is a new hot thing.
Yeah, and
because
it's
apparently weed and liquor is too adventurous.
it's almost like it's kind of like even hitting on the topic of purity. Like people can really be strong on their opinions or their take of faith and where they stand on certain things, and that can
Mhm.
kind of get in the way. Like you said, I think even for the example, like you and yourself enjoy going out and having a drink. Some people can see that as a super extreme of, oh no, I wouldn't do that.
Right,
'Cause that hinders my faith, and then
right.
so be it. But I think that's where it kind of like hurts the faith a bit as well, because it's like, you know what, you're forgetting that I guess just the concept of the Bible. Not everything is banned. Some things are just taught by whatever church you came
Mhm.
from, and I think it kind of hurts the whole church dating experiences because they're bringing these different ideas or even their own personal thing and fuse it with the Word of God or whatever they're thinking about, and it kind of defeats of getting to know the person through dating.
Right.
And really, it's like ultimately that's what it comes down to, looking for someone to faith. No one's going to be perfect. No one's, I love Jesus Christ, but not everyone's going to be on that level of perfection like he is. So we got to understand that people are going to have the strengths and the weaknesses of what they come with, the package. But a lot of folks can be a little more extreme on that end of, no, this is it, this is like my deal breaker. And I guess you can have your deal breakers, but understand that to take more time to think about that before kind of
I,
putting it on folks.
right. And I would genuinely be interested in having this conversation in person with those individuals, which in generally in my head, I don't know about you, like I consider those it's not generally more conservative Christians, but those are genuinely hard to find out here in Los Angeles. Like people will be coming from those contexts, but like I have friends who are libertarians, but I can still sit down with them and have a very pointed conversation with them about the specifics of what the city on the hill means exactly, what good church community means exactly, in the tiniest of context to the most largest of contexts, and they're open to that conversation. I have yet personally to talk to someone who's so tight-fisted about those topics. And at the same time, those people probably won't talk to me to begin with because they could probably see me and smell me from a mile away that something's wrong with this person. Which, I mean, that's my assumption that's happened more often than not. And then most people who are conflict avoidant won't let me know that they have that opinion of me because it's easier to not talk shit or upset somebody that way and move on with your life.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you mentioned earlier too that you're someone that likes to challenge you, which is good because that's how you have good conversations or at least have deepness into what you're talking about. Especially if, like you said, you're dating future goals, you're gonna have to have some kind of disagreements or at least a conversation about it. And if folks aren't open to it, then it's like, why are you out dating in the first place or looking for that? If you want to be closed-minded, then just date yourself or something. And like you said, it's just really I guess the people that are coming into this dating pool and trying to get to know folks, but it's almost like some folks are just making it more harder for themselves than it should be. And I think kind of going from like the beginning, it's like dating shouldn't be all this work. It shouldn't be hard work. It should just be try it out. Go ahead and enjoy
Well, the
yourself.
front end, yeah.
Yeah, the fun part of it. Because if you see something taken seriously, then cool, you're gonna develop that with that person over time, not just straight up. I think they come in with that, like this person on the first date has to be the one, and I think that's what makes it very too much stress and pressure, and that's where it kind of falls short. Again, that's just my opinion there.
And I'm trying to really imagine what that feeling feels like. That amount of romanticism attached to any of the people I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
And I'm emphasizing for me to use like this is how disattached I am from what seems to be a lion's share of the afflictions that surround the Christian dating community, at least the ones we're aware of via HOD, via our own churches, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I was even thinking like just even from doing this video, it's like it is interesting like how detached I guess people can be from seeing that, hey, there's other churches out there, other people trying to date from different Christian backgrounds. And kind of like I shared with you earlier, the previous church I was at, it's like it was too much in-house, but too much of their own opinions, which is very conflicting. But even towards the end of the video and podcast, What is your goal, hopefully, for like the Christian dating for yourself, like to ultimately get out of it?
I mean, the long run is to get married at some point. What the exact nature of that if that involves kids or not, or those elements, I'm not going to impose anything on it. I'm open to the conversation. That's so dependent on the other person. Like I entertain the idea of like, let's live life on hard mode, adopt a kid who's like a teenager, and then take it from there. But
Mm.
that's the part of me that's like, ha, 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 this is going to be hard. And then I mean, in the medium term, it's like a long-term relationship, but I have no, personally for me, once again, like most of my relationships have ended in like months, and they've ended mostly because of extenuating reasons outside of my own control.
Mm.
So it is the utmost curiosity to me, and I recognize that I'm spending a lot of time on this. Hell, I joined HSV for a reason. It wasn't just to roast people and to observe stuff. It was to somehow like participate, right?
Yeah.
But it's it's to end up in a long-term relationship and figure out what that looks like from there. But that what that looks like has to happen when it happens. I can't really
Mm.
reliably put stuff on that. I can only, as I kind of told that dating coach earlier, like I have a lot of no's. Like you really kind of like, oh, this is a good one. I went to a speed dating thing, independently run from somebody else, and I remember one of the women said, like, I would not like. This is so weird for me. Like, I would not usually do this. Like, I want to meet people organically, and I asked her as an active listener, like, what do you mean by organically? Because I mean, I've heard that before from other
Yeah.
people, like, and like, well, not like, like through friends or like at a party somewhere. Like this is so weird. Like, and then I, as a light challenge to her, like, well, I know it's speed dating, but we're right here, right now. Like you see me in person. I would hope that this is organic. Like you can touch my skin, you can feel my breath, kind of thing. But that still didn't count to her. What killed that for me was that at some point later on in the conversation, she straight up said, "Oh, I would never ask a guy out, never, even if you found him attractive, never." And I don't think she even explained it with the whole usual like a man has to lead and stuff like that. And I distinctly remember feeling like my brain is turned off right now. Like this is you are a useless person to me. I am not interested. God loves you. I don't. In that way, it'll be a process for me to get to that point. I'm okay with that process, but we're clearly like I don't want to show you all the like my carpet ride.
Yeah.
No, you don't get a ticket onto it, and it's a dope ass carpet ride as far as I'm concerned. The best moment from the whole speed dating thing, this says a lot about me. The woman who asked me 30 seconds in what my opinion on abortion was. I was like, damn, you are hot. Let's do this. And like me explained to her, like at the moment in time, like the politically, this, like it starts with conservative ideals, but then ends in like a practical fatalism, which is essentially the Democratic Party's position on abortion at this time.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and she didn't seem pissed off as a clearly conservative lady in that on that topic. I just wish we had more time to talk about it, but she didn't decide to connect with me after the speed dating thing. Though there's also I think if I was extrapolating going forward, she did say she didn't get vaccinated. So I'm like, that's probably a landmine, frankly, for me in the future. And I'm saying that as someone who's one of my best friends died choking himself to, not himself to death, but choking to death during COVID infection.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure I was the last person to talk with him. I should be crying about it right now. I'm like, I'm over the hump enough that like I have jokes about it at his funeral, but it's to say that like I have to recognize that stuff with her saying that, like that was like, oh, it's a very, very pink flag, maybe magenta. But I gotta admit, like in the first 30 seconds, she's asking like a question that like that was very like open-ended, discussive question. I'm like, fuck yeah, this is by far the most interesting conversation I've had this whole day, out of like the 20 some odd women that were like cycled through all the tables.
It's crazy because you weren't afraid to even try to do the speed dating. And I think, like you said, I mean, just from that woman, I can't say for all of them. It was just like having that open heart or to even have that open discussion, I think creates a lot of interest. I'm sure it could have been for everyone else to have an open mind to talk about that. But and as we're kind of nearing the end of the podcast, was there anything that you wanted to add? Any final words on it, on the whole discussion of Christian dating, or anything that you might be doing in the future in comedy, or any other projects you have going on?
I'll start with the plug. I'm producing and hosting what we're calling right now the Slava Ukraine charity comedy show up in San Francisco on March 22nd, which is this coming Tuesday as of this recording. And I got a good slate of local comics. Andrew Ruffalo's headlining, Emily Van Dyke is featuring, and a couple other people like Marcus Williams. I'll be hosting / performing as well. And this is going to happen during the midst of the Game Developers Conference, which I'm going to for work, basically, next week. So if you guys are in town in San Francisco, I would highly recommend coming to Piano Fight Tuesday at 7. Oh, doors open at 6, show starts at 7. And yeah, help out a good cause. I mean, for me personally, it's I've got coworkers and friends who are in Ukraine, and they are trying to survive. And God help Anton, like he's had to leave Kyiv and he's alive. But the first words that come out of his mouth a couple nights ago to our boss was to say, hey, is there any work left over that I could work on? Like, and all we told him was like, your only job is to survive. You don't have to, but he still wants to keep making Bitmoji. So I'm like, I'm angry. Like, we got to do something. And one of the few things I know how to do is to, execute on productions and be a funny piece of shit. So let's make it happen for in San Francisco with a bunch of gamer nerds and anybody else who decides to show up. So come on down, guys. Go to my Instagram if you want more details at JADEEYEPANDA. It's also on Eventbrite via Piano Fight's website. And then final thoughts regarding Christian dating community. Gosh, I don't even want to assert anything really. It's like, because I mean, the demographics run the gamut, right? I mean, I could joke about it in terms of like, most of this feels like white people problems, but that's me being overly insensitive.
Yeah.
I mean, between me and you, I mean, it's Los Angeles. Like everything's vaguely Mexican. The Korean barbecue is not real. There's a Mexican group in the back, chefs in the back, marinating the meat. That's right? True. It's not like the weed brownie isn't authentic, right? That's a white kid spiking Betty Crocker mix. I'll put it this way. I wish I can give like the brazen, I don't give a fuck attitude about like failing and rejection in this part of my life.
Right.
So all the people I meet, because it's a strength. It has its drawbacks, but it would work. It would iron out so much shit that I've seen people deal with at the front end of stuff that it would be an more interesting world to be in if people weren't so anxious about those, like, hitting up somebody for coffee or failing to flirt with somebody. To even casually just say, hey, a couple of my friends and I are organizing a movie night. Would you like to come in, right? Like low-key attempts to connect with people. And maybe in a proactive sense, then I would want to say to those individuals who deal with like anxiety issues as relates to that, the worst that I think, especially in this case, if it doesn't kill you, then what's the problem? And what ego are you trying to save? What face are you trying to save? I'm saying as an Asian guy, what face are you trying to save? Like, let's keep it theological. You did not will yourself into existence. Like, if you think about your own life, the only reason why you're here is because God wanted you to be here, and He wants to talk with you. He wants to have a relationship with you on your own power. Good luck trying to like outdo that. I think there was a way I phrased it where, my understanding of God's love for me is that no matter what I do, even if I become spiritually stronger, even if I become a heretic, even if I become gay or like some other ethnicity, or if I become a game developer, sorry mom. Well, she never complained about that actually, especially after the first paycheck. That God's love for me is static. I can't do anything about the grace. It's just given to me. It's just a question of, do I want to accept it and have a relationship with God or not? And I kind of bring that same sentiment to my romantic relationship, is that, especially in the light of failure, it's like, even if I fail, like how does this objectively affect my value as a person? How does this, I understand what I'm feeling. I understand I'm feeling rejection, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling shame. Like right now, I feel bummed about the last lady having called it in. But it should not so negatively affect me that I should think that my value as a child of God is removed from me. And that's also a frustrating thing too, right? Like, me being a child of God does not necessitate that I succeed at these XYZ things.
Right.
So it's a almost mutually exclusive. But in a weird way, that should also give you a weird, I almost want to say nihilistic style of bravery going forward. Like, take the, like, what options you have, like, be courageous or be bold in these small moments in your life, in
Right.
light of the fact that this is static.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because to really, for me too, it's just like it is about being brave of what you're gonna just go try. You have nothing to fail. Even for me, growing up, I wasn't much someone of talking a lot, and so I had to develop my
Mhm.
communication. But that took practice, and it also came with failure. And so, like you're saying, go
Right.
out and just fail. It's okay, but you're gonna learn from it. And like you said, if something doesn't work out, or conversation's awkward, whatever, you're not going to die on the spot. You obviously have another day to live. And I think it's changing that mindset, or that fear, that fear and anxiety. And so, thank you for sharing that. Definitely people that are listening, and I'm definitely going to post this on the group as well, just to listen to. It's like, don't have that fear. Just go out, try it, learn, enjoy, to put that pressure. And you have another day to live, to at least experience that and learn and grow. And that's what it's all about.
Right. And it's gonna be a process. Like, I'm not as funny as I am without the practice I have. Like, the jokes I told today, most of them were practiced already. It's just now I'm able to bring them up quickly, and they relate to a lot of different topics I can. So meeting that fear is a process. Like, that I still feel fear. It's just in the situations I feel it. It's I if I'm practiced enough with it, I know how to navigate through it.
And yeah, and I just want to say, Brian, thank you so much for just being on the podcast and sharing your thoughts.